Okay, welcome back. This video is entitled Making the Knowledge Stick. And that is obviously a huge part of our job as teachers. So, as we've seen in previous videos, a teacher's first job is to engage student interest by connecting students in real ways to the lesson. A teacher's other two main jobs are to deliver the content of the day, which is what most of us focus on, and to assist students in processing, understanding, and absorbing the material. This particular video gives some very succinct ways to do the latter. In other words, we're going to focus on helping students process, understand, and ingest what has been taught to them. So we present 5 fundamental techniques that teachers can use to help students process information. The techniques are based on a mix of current published research in educational journals, but also on years of just tried and true classroom experience. So it's a nice blend. So let's get right to it. Technique number 1. It has been shown, actually in great neurological detail, that writing is thinking. So having students write down their reactions and thoughts, say to a video, a verbal discussion, or a piece of writing, is in itself learning. Even if the writing is not evaluated or graded, just the fact that they are processing the information and writing it down helps them to learn. Some examples of this are pre-writing or reading response journals, reading written responses aloud, jotting down agree, disagree with certain points that you've covered, silent Socratic writing, open-ended Socratic discussions. So the second technique is to provide structured representations such as Venn diagrams, tree structures, or other visual organizers that exhibit relationships between concepts or items in the lesson. So this is obviously after the lesson has been delivered and you're giving these to help students, organize this information in their head. So you can provide exercises that ask students to create similar structured representations that you've presented originally, but with different content. In other words, if you teach students about the cause and effect of the Revolutionary War, and you do a chart or a flow chart of some sense of the causes and effects of the Revolutionary War, then use that same structure, a flow chart of causes and effects, and have them do that for the Civil War or the Vietnam War. So you're using the same structure but for different content. Or you could have students originally use a tree structure, or also called a bracket structure, to recreate the college basketball, March Madness tournament from the year before, so that they understand the structure, and then have them use that same structure to map the succession of biological species or extinctions or evolution. Okay, technique number 3 is very simply just practice a new skill immediately after learning it. So often we forget to do this. So this can transpire in a lot of ways. Students can work in pairs, working out a sample problem. You can have volunteers show correct work on the board. You can also ask students for other examples of the content and concept that you just taught. So a lot of ways to do that. Just immediate processing can be so effective, and often we just give the information and move on before doing that. Number 4 is mechanical processing. So this can take the form of students creating and learning mnemonics, which of course are for memory, highlighting notes with guidance from the instructor, filling in notes after class, changing notes into flashcards, or also just frequent quizzes, which can lead to faster learning and retention. So all of these are having students mechanically process the information, write it down, see it and then write it, or see it written and then write it down, or hear it and then write it down, or take what they've already written and write it in a different way. So they're mechanically processing it and just churning it through their brains rather than just sitting there. And so many times I'll have students and I'll think, yeah, they seem like they got it. They're asking questions and they're nodding and this and that. And then I'll ask them questions back, and this has probably happened to you, and I realize, no, they don't have it. And so we really have to have them process this information in quite mechanical ways to make sure that it has been integrated into their brains rather than just seeming like it's been received. Okay, number 5 is, and we'll go into much more detail on this one, teach one idea in 3 ways rather than teaching 3 ideas one way. So often, in order to adequately explain a concept and have a class really absorb it, we just have to slow down. And really what that means is we have to have less content and more teaching. So a study recently showed that content-heavy classes force students into a more rote memorization mode, which lowered the likelihood of more in-depth processing and understanding of information, which is not what we want, of course. So if you have, let's say, 6 main ideas to cover in a 45-minute lesson or lecture, rather than delivering all 6 of these ideas in sort of a perfunctory manner, try filling that entire lesson by teaching just 2 of those topics, but each in 3 different ways. So a good example is a friend of mine told me about a 7th grade science lesson that he gave about the basic organelles and structure of a cell in the human body. And he taught this lesson in 3 overlapping ways. So let's look at those. First, he described all of the parts of the cell and wrote them on the board in a traditional way, cell wall, mitochondria, cytoplasm, all those, which is a standard lesson on the board. Number 2, after they understood it a little bit, then he had the class watch about a 7-minute video, which had really good animation. It added living color and motion and audio to what they'd just learned, that kind of approached the different styles, learning styles of different students. But then lastly, he really took it to another level. So the teacher assigned each student in the class to be a part of a cell. So they had to physically act out the function of that part of the cell in their body as themselves. So the desks were cleared to the side of the room, and they created a human scale cell with every student playing a physical role. Some were part of the cell wall. These are people that were holding hands. Some were mitochondria. He made them shiver to create energy. Others were ribosomes, and others were nutrients trying to pass in or out of the cell. And I personally think that this exercise is just excellent, especially when it's preceded by the other 2 traditional kinds of learning at the chalkboard and, say, on a video. And research has shown that active learning, such as this, does indeed enhance retention. So teaching that one concept to the students took the entire class period that day, but I would bet that to this day, many of them still have a very good idea of how our body's cells function. And, he could have covered more in that day, but undoubtedly it would not have soaked in or been retained as well. And undoubtedly I wouldn't be talking about it right now in this video if he would have just shot through all that information and moved on. He took his time, and it soaked into his students, and it soaked into me, and hopefully now it might even trigger something in you. Okay, wonderful. That's all for this video. Thanks for listening and joining in.